Hey, welcome back. This is the second episode of 5 graphically impressive PS1 games. I'm here with Bolt again, and first up is Alone in the Dark: A New Nightmare, which was released for a handful of platforms, including the Dreamcast, the PS2, and the Game Boy Color, the last of which we've looked at on this channel before. Released late in the PlayStation's life in 2001 by Infogrames and Darkworks, who developed both the PS1 and Dreamcast versions simultaneously, this is essentially a Resident Evil sort of game, which I've made the mistake of saying once before, and I've been corrected dozens of times. I know Alone in the Dark did start this kind of genre and Resi was essentially a take on it, but this really is a lot like Resident Evil 2. You even choose between playing a guy or a girl at the start of the game. I love that when you're choosing, they give the characters a single characteristic. The guy apparently owns a double-barrel gun and the girl's father is unknown. Amazing. Anyway, this is a PS1 game with great detailed pre-rendered backdrops, very well textured and animated 3D models, and good-looking 90s pre-rendered cutscenes with bad voice acting. All that can be said about a ton of PS1 games though. What makes A New Nightmare stand above the pack is that extra mile it goes in blending the environment backgrounds into the game to make them seem more realistic and present, and the best and most prominent way it does this is through the torch, or the flashlight if you use weird words. How it illuminates the pre-rendered backgrounds is really convincing. The light brightens up the closer you are to things, hard-coded shadows help sell the effect a lot, and overall it just looks fantastic and doesn't feel like something you'd see on the original PlayStation, which also speaks to how good of a port this is, since in many ways it's the exact same version as the PS2 and Dreamcast game. The effect is further sold with some good lens flares, and in other less prominent aspects, Alone in the Dark is just as quality, such as with the muzzle smoke while shooting and the rippling in the water. All in all, I'm really impressed with A New Nightmare, to the point where I want to play much more of it. It nails its atmosphere through its visuals and particularly its heart-pumping soundtrack, which really took me off guard. For anyone who's finished this game, let me know if it's worth a playthrough in the comments because I'm really interested.
Xenogears is a game so ambitious that it was originally at 2 different points designed as Final Fantasy VII and as a sequel to Chrono Trigger. Squaresoft found this JRPG's concept and themes so revolutionary, however, that they felt it was best designed as its own project. It's a game so trailblazing that the PS1 couldn't even handle the original plans for a fully 3D game, and so development was shifted into a unique blend of 2D and 3D. The incredibly detailed character sprites, as you would expect from any sprite-based game, have 8 different directional variants for movement, but what makes Xenogears stand out is that the entire 3D world around you can be rotated, making for an incredibly stunning effect. The background textures are designed in such a way that they almost appear like sprites themselves, so when the game surprises you by shifting the perspective, oh man, it is something else entirely. I played Xenogears for the first time earlier this year, and I kid you not, I spent a few moments marveling at this. The turn-based combat is played out on 2 unique fronts as well, with on-foot combat taking place across unique level terrain based on where you are. Every area may spawn a different combat zone, and enemies aren't necessarily going to start right in front of you, meaning that your party may have to leap across gaps or jump up a hill to reach its foes. The different punches and kicks that your characters use on enemies all look incredibly well animated, far better than they have any right to be, and miles ahead of most polygonal attacks in its contemporaries. The mech suit gear combat is a bit different, and certainly hasn't aged as well, opting for a full transition to 3D models to show the sheer scale of the gears. While this can make for an occasionally jarring moment, it surprisingly blends in pretty well with the sprites. Some of those mech animations just leave a little bit to be desired nowadays. There are so many other small touches that Xenogears makes that help it stand out from the crop. For example, you can up and walk around during dialogue, and even talk to multiple people at once, with several text boxes popping up either on other parts of the screen or overlapping entirely. While this one isn't necessarily a super impressive graphical thing, there are so many contextual floor panels. When you stomp on a vendor's vegetables, he gets upset at you and yells. When you walk past this kid's squeaky toy laying down on the floor, the game plays a little squeak noise. Even tiny things like this make the world feel so much more genuine than I'm used to out of even my favorite PS1 JRPGs. Xenogears has aged so incredibly well, and it innovates on both a small and large scale in such a way that immediately, even if I didn't know already, I would have pinned this as a game made by Tetsuya Takahashi, the same mastermind behind the spiritual successor franchises Xenosaga and Xenoblade. In my eyes, there's no doubt that Xenogears has one of the most lasting graphical styles of any game on the PS1, let alone any RPG.
Simulation races are well known for being on the cutting edge of realistic video game graphics, and the best-selling Gran Turismo games on the PS1 are largely to thank as pioneers for this. The original and its sequel both look super similar, so we'll just arbitrarily be looking at Gran Turismo 2 in this video. Featuring a staggeringly large list of over 600 cars, the truly impressive thing about this is how high poly each one is. The aptly named Polyphony Digital have done a fantastic job of meticulously modelling each car with accuracy in mind, and they're enhanced by some great engine sounds and pseudo-reflections on the window and paint. These models are really ahead of anything you'd ever expect to see on the PS1. Each of the 34 tracks look great too by PS1 standards. Though realistic graphics never seem to age well, you can appreciate the texture quality and draw distance here, especially considering the speed of the game. It does suffer minor issues with polygon pop-in and slowdown, but generally Gran Turismo 2 is a massive technical achievement on the PS1, and it's also a great game. By far the best looking first-person shooter on the PlayStation is the port of Quake 2. Developed by Hammerhead, the game was rebuilt in their in-house engine since the Quake 2 engine wouldn't work with the PlayStation's architecture, and they've done a fantastic job. Interestingly, it's not a one-to-one port of the PC game. In fact, it only features some of the PC levels that have been interspliced with levels from the previously released Nintendo 64 port. Though I can't comment on the N64 levels, the PC levels have been geometrically simplified a bit, but they are still very faithful. Interestingly, Hammerhead's engine does not support skyboxes, so they've just sort of put sky-like polygons as level ceilings when they needed to. Also, the levels are broken up by Half-Life-esque loading screens, though the loading screens are only a few seconds long, so it's completely forgivable considering what they've achieved here. The textures are great and high-res, the animation is smooth, and it all runs at a resolution of 512 by 240, which is a higher resolution than most PlayStation games. What's more is that it hits a relatively consistent 30 frames and features some good effects with the guns and gore, and it even has transparent water. It even has some tricks in place to minimize PS1 texture warping, giving it an extra layer of polish and just sort of a solid feel. Unfortunately, poor controls bring down my enjoyment of PS1 Quake 2 a lot, or it's otherwise a super impressive port that even has 4-player multiplayer split screen.
It was outright said at points that this port just wasn't possible, so to see Quake 2 running as faithfully as it is on the PS1 is just amazing, especially when you see it running in 2 or 4-player split screen multiplayer. It's also worth noting, as a quick aside, that even today, odds are most shooters you might be playing still have a little bit of Quake 2 and even Quake 1 in them. Quake's engines were so popular that they were scaled and modified for the past 20 plus years in franchises like Half-Life, Call of Duty, Left 4 Dead, Titanfall, all the way down to the newest Doom and Wolfenstein games. If you dig deep enough, you can very likely find some original Quake code in most shooters today. Released in 1998, Spyro the Dragon was the PlayStation's most direct answer to the budding collectathon genre that was taking the N64 and soon the entire industry by storm. This was no easy task considering the PS1's sometimes limited processing power. In order to ensure that none of the collectible gems, none of the enemies, and for that matter, none of the entire world would be subject to jarring pop-in or the distance fog that plagued so many games in the 90s, the team at Insomniac developed a proprietary technology to dynamically scale the level of detail. Every model in the game would gradually stream between a lower resolution and a higher res variant as you got closer or further away. This completely removed the need for distance fog at any point throughout Spyro, allowing for absolutely massive, detailed worlds that players didn't even know were possible on the PS1. This level of detail doesn't affect the gameplay in the slightest either, allowing for a mostly steady 30 frames per second throughout your experience. In order to make sure that the gems wouldn't be too hard to find, Insomniac added a little glimmer effect at a distance that easily catches the eye and hints at where you should be looking next, making it much easier to find those pesky last few gems. There still is your usual texture warping that you would expect when you approach something up close, but that certainly doesn't take away from Spyro in the slightest. Moving on, the color palettes are just beautiful at points, going for a more pastel scheme that not many games utilized at the time. With dozens of levels per game, it would have been very easy for many of them to blend together, but the team aimed to design a unique palette and feel for each individual world. Another highlight of Spyro's design are the gorgeous skyboxes, which often were that defining factor that split two similar worlds from one another visually. The skyboxes were usually drawn using vertex painting, which was also used to simulate lighting on any terrain near some light sources such as torches. This would allow them to simulate that more natural glow that you would expect from a light source, which wasn't always possible to design dynamically using the light source alone. Thanks to all the painstaking effort that Insomniac went through to differentiate and innovate, when you're playing through a Spyro game, you're often going to be playing something that looks and feels like no other game out there. For this video, we struggled to decide which Spyro game we wanted to include in particular, since Spyro 2 and 3 naturally look slightly better with an improved engine, models, and even going as far to include things like real-time mirror reflections on ice, while Spyro 1 was arguably more impressive due to how early it used this adaptive level of detail, which made it one of, if not the first game on the PS1 to utilize it. You're likely seeing a combination of multiple games here, mainly Spyro 1 and 2, because they all deserve a bit of recognition in this video. Any way you cut it, Spyro continued to push the PS1 to its limits in the 3 short years that Insomniac was at the helm.
That's the 5. Hope you enjoyed it. We enjoyed making it. I enjoyed making it. Bolt enjoyed making it. Thanks to Bolt for coming on the show. It was a huge help, and he's always fun to have on.
As always, thank you for bringing me on. It's always a blast making these with you, man. And if you guys out there want to see another video that Minnie and I did together over on my channel, The Golden Bolt, check out our review of a game with some graphically, impressive faces? LA Noire.
A link to the LA Noire review is in the description, and Bolt and I have worked together on this channel a couple of times before with the first episode of the 5 graphically impressive PS1 games, as well as a video called 5 graphically unimpressive PS4 games. Links to those will be in the description, links to Bolt's channel will be in the description, links to, my second channel and my Twitter and my Discord will be in the description, and yeah, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. Love your faces. I'm the first person who's ever said that on YouTube. Yeah. Have a good one.